Good evening and welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me this evening. I've got a few things to go over for an intro here for you, and then we'll get right into the news. The intro will kind of give us a little bit something to let people get logged in and onto the stream. So let's go ahead and talk about this little piece of information of a little bit of Ukrainian hacker know-how. That's right. It's a pro-Ukraine hacker collective broadcast across all TV channels in Russian-occupied Crimea. President Zelensky's speech commemorating the liberation from Nazism during World War II.
Історію спільної перемоги над російським злом. З Днем пам'яті і перемоги над нацизмом у Другій світовій війні. Слава Україні!
How would you feel if you were a Russian and saw that come across your TV in Crimea right about then? But this is an indication that that the Ukrainians are not only capable of doing this type of a hack, but that that they used the speech from President Zelensky on Victory over Europe Day. Victory in Europe Day is really symbolic in a lot of ways. Now, the Russians tend to celebrate their Victory Day on May 9th. And I expect the Victory Day parade will be tomorrow, and we'll see what kind of a turnout they have for it. But the interesting thing is that this was actually broadcast from one of the death chambers in one of the villages that were later liberated by Ukrainian forces. This is where Ukrainian people were rounded up and tortured and executed and frozen and humiliated. And he does mention during the speech that Putin's inauguration. So this has happened probably in the last 24 hours. And interesting to see that the President Zelensky and the Ukrainians are taking advantage of any situation they can. Now, moving on, let's see, not quite moving on. This quote in particular was particularly interesting. Evil has been reborn. Its name is Russian fascism. And that is President Zelensky addressing Ukrainians on Victory Day over Nazism in World War II. Dmitry at War Translated says, first the fascism came to Ukraine from the West. It was defeated. Now its followers in the East are having another go, and they will be defeated again. Now, the Institute for the Study of War is looking at the situation in Russia, and they've got some commentary in their report. This would be for yesterday's report. Russian President Vladimir Putin began his fifth term as Russian president on May 7th and stressed Russia's need for unchallenged autocratic rule, while indirectly calling for victory in Ukraine. And there's a lot of things that go into the details of it, where Putin invokes the historical parallels to justify his own autocratic rule, suggesting that autocracy is a Russian tradition, and regularly arguing that without unchallenged autocracy, Russia would lose its sovereignty. Russian ultranationalists lauded the start of Putin's fifth term as a historic event and explicitly approved of the autocratic tradition in which Putin is casting himself, with one of them hailing him as Imperator, the formal title of the Russian czars since the time of Peter the Great. Russian ultranationalists also expressed hope that Putin will continue to deepen an anti-Western ideology that the Kremlin has been heavily developing since the start of the full-scale invasion. This is a traditional dictator's action here. If there is no enemy, you create one, and then you teach the people to hate this made-up enemy. In this case, the West is no enemy to Russia, at least not by our actions. Russia has declared itself the enemy of the West, and that is where the problem lies. The current the Russian cabinet, ministers, and prime minister will likely be, has already resigned as constitutionally mandated. Those whom he replaces them with are likely to show who is in Putin's favor. Interesting side note that I caught on to, the Ukrainian defense industry states that they are now producing at least as many of the Shahed drones, or at least their equivalent analogs in Ukraine. They're doing at least as many as Russia is producing. And in fact, they believe they're producing even more. Ukraine has intensified its efforts to ramp up domestic production of attack drones, a critical tool on the battlefield, aimed at manufacturing 1 million drones this year. Russia has used Shahed-type kamikaze drones, both supplied by Iran and domestically produced, for regular attacks on Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Ukraine has caught up to Moscow in the production of the other attack drones, and now they believe they have overtaken them in the Shahed equivalent drones. So interesting to see that they are ramping things up with innovation and production and everything else in a war-torn country as it is. They're even producing, as they mentioned here, an equivalent to the Lancet drones that the Russians are using to great effect on the battlefield. So now it's a two-way street over there. Hi, Lucille, Jerry, and Al. Glad to see all three of you on today. Thank you, as always. And since I've kind of gotten through the introductory stuff here, let me tell you, I've got a lot of stuff on presidential politics and stuff like that at the very end of the video today. But still a pretty goodly amount of information on Ukraine. So don't worry, I'll announce right before I'm going into that other news if you don't want to see that. That said, I think there's some important stuff to talk about along those lines. Now, last night, the Russians made another major attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. They attacked with 50 missiles and more than 20 Shahed drones, electricity generation and transmission facilities in Lviv, Vinnytsia, Poltava, Kirovohrad, Zaporizhia and Ivano-Frankivsk regions were attacked, according to the energy minister. There were civilian casualties. Luciano, glad to see you as well. Glad to have you on board. There were wounded among the civilians. During the night, 3 DTEC energy thermal power plants were hit, with equipment being reported as seriously damaged. Now, they do report that they destroyed 33 out of 45 KH-101 and KH-555 missiles. 4 out of the 4 calibers, 20 out of the 21 Shahed drones did not manage to intercept the Kinzhal, the Iskander-M, but they did intercept the 2 KH-59 missiles and did not manage to intercept the other Iskander-K. Now, this video is from an attack on Odessa last week. I got to mute it because of the music. But if you watch the face here, you'll see the girl cuddle her animal there right at the moment of the impact. This is what the citizens in Odessa and other parts of this nation are going through day in, day out. And it is constant for them. This has been a step up in the aerial assaults on Ukraine in recent weeks with more targeting of energy infrastructure, and the damage was pretty big. Ukrenergo actually reports that they won't be able to fully cover the deficit in energy after the latest Russian attack, and that even with imports from Europe, it will not be able to sufficiently and completely cover Ukraine's energy deficit. It is so considerable that even energy imports from Europe are not fully enough to compensate for the deficit in the power system. The company did not say which plants were attacked, but that they were seriously damaged. Ukraine is now having to impose nationwide electricity restrictions on Wednesday evening, starting from 6 p.m. and going to 11 p.m. On Wednesday evening, and likely to continue for some time. This is the routes the missiles took on this particular attack. You can see one of them went straight into Lviv over here. Well, south of Lviv. That would be Ivano-Frankivsk. And then they've got a variety of drones that managed to follow various complex routes over Ukraine to try and avoid the interception. It looks like Russia also launched, I believe these are the Kinzhal missiles out of the they're launching them from their carriers right outside of Novorossiysk. They're not even going into the Black Sea to give them a better shot at some of these things. They're literally parking their boats right outside of Novorossiysk port and launching right from there. So this is where we are looking at the variety of things that have been flying over Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that on Wednesday night, the Russian military launched a massive attack on Ukrainian energy facilities, saying that they used were high-precision, long-range sea and air-based weapons, the Kinzhal aeroballistic hypersonic missile system, as well as unmanned aerial vehicles against energy facilities, as well as enterprises of the military-industrial complex of Ukraine. The objectives, they claim, of the strike have been achieved. All designated targets were hit. They say that this is in response to Ukraine's attempts to damage Russian energy facilities. However, the BBC Russian points out the Russian military began massive shelling of Ukrainian energy infrastructure in the fall of 2022, long before Ukrainian drones began attacking Russian oil and gas facilities. This happened in the winter and spring of 2024. Now, this is an update from yesterday's video. There was an attack on a Luhansk-based oil depot. The damage is reportedly fairly significant, major damage, according to NOLA reports, with the oil tanks burned down and additional damage to the area, including power lines and gas pipelines, which has started to result in mass quitting from employees of Russian refineries due to the drone attacks. There's a shortage of personnel at several oil refineries in Russia. They're leaving due to these drone attacks, and these companies are now urgently recruiting new employees. They say at least 7 chemical analysis technicians quit the Kubyshev oil refinery in the Samara region after it was attacked by Ukrainian drones in late March. The company has 50 advertisements out for new employees, and most of the vacancies are engineering specialties or plant technical support. That's specialized people that won't necessarily be easy to replace. The Kyiv Post put out an article stating why Ukraine should keep striking Russian oil refineries. Ukrainian strikes on Russian refiners are now doing what Western sanctions failed to achieve. One of the world's largest oil producers is now importing gasoline. According to the publication, Ukraine has launched at least 20 strikes on Russian refineries, and the purpose of the attack, according to the Ukrainians, was to stop the supply of fuel to the Russian military and reduce export revenues. Now, this is interesting, but Anton Herashchenko provides us with a slightly different twist on this perspective. These strikes reduces Russia's ability to turn its oil into usable products and do not affect the volume of oil it can extract or export. With less domestic refining capacity, Russia will be forced to export more of its crude oil, not less, which will push global prices down rather than up. The surge in refined oil product prices, which has begun in Russia, is attributed to very slow and costly repairs. With Western sanctions hindering Russian firms' access to essential components, this is further delaying the repair process. So what ends up happening is that the Ukrainian drone attacks have degraded Russia's financial and logistical ability to wage war, but they have less damage on the global markets because now Russia is forced to export more crude oil, which drives down the international price of a barrel of oil. And if it's driving down the price of crude oil and Russia is not able to refine it themselves, then they have to buy those products overseas at the more costly refined oil products prices and only be able to sell their oil at a lower value, and thus it restricts Russia in multiple ways. Fascinating little bit of side effect there, and interesting to see. Now, this information came in literally just minutes ago, about an hour and 7 minutes. It appears that Ukraine has struck multiple Russian oil refineries tonight. That is tonight's attacks. They keep hitting the oil bases, and the Russian economy will shrivel up and die even faster, according to journalist Jason J. Smart. Here's another video of further attacks on Russian oil refineries, this time in Krasnodar, Russia. Now, note that as of this point in time, today is in Russia, May 9th. That is an important holiday, Russian Victory Day. This is when their big parades are going to be going on. This is when they're going to be psyching themselves up to about being all that amazing things that they are, that they're the ones that killed the Nazis. And yet here they are getting their butts kicked by a nation a quarter their size. Especially when they're able to rain damage down on their refineries virtually at will. Let's go ahead and move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. Of course, we mentioned this the other day, but the Verkhovna Rada has extended martial law and general mobilization for 90 more days in Ukraine. They do it in 90-day packets. I don't know why. It's probably a legal thing over there. This is the report on the intercepts from the missile attack last night. You can see here there's a lot of stuff that was intercepted, but still some managed to get through. The interesting thing to me is that this is actually an improvement in percentage compared to just a week ago, where even more of this was getting through, which could indicate that Ukraine is potentially fielding more air defense equipment or has received more air defense missiles, potentially. 11 more children have been brought back home from Russian-occupied territory in Kherson Oblast, according to the governor, Alexander Prokudin, on May 8th. That's, as the person down here says in the comments here, I wonder why is it that the Russian Nazis decide to give back the stolen, deported children? And I don't know, but I know that they negotiate these things really hard and they want their kids back. Parliament has passed a bill allowing military service of citizens convicted of minor offenses. This is one additional way they're expanding their recruitment capabilities by allowing those who have minor offenses to also serve in the military. In fact, 11,000 people have had their criminal cases halted because they volunteered to join the Ukrainian military. This is the aftermath, or at least part of the aftermath, of a missile attack on Zaporizhia. You can see that we've got damaged buildings here. Let's bring this up a little bit larger. Damaged vehicles, damaged facilities and houses and garages. And of course, this means that there's plenty of rescue operations that have to happen because of this. This is the type of damage they're doing to civilian infrastructure, homes, and people on a daily basis. A military expert writes that new Ukrainian ATACMS can make Crimea militarily useless. That's because the ATACMS missiles that Ukraine is receiving now can basically cover the entire Crimean Peninsula from top to bottom, and thus any military target on the entire peninsula is subject to attack at effectively any time. This means that any critical military infrastructure in place down there will be subject to immediate destruction as soon as Ukraine knows where it is. I'm going to point out that Russia has spent a lot of time building fortifications right there between Kherson and Crimea. And all of those fortifications are static emplacements. Therefore, they're all subject to direct attack in that regard. They're well within other range, but the thing is that all of the Russian defenses are static emplacements. They could be a lot more vulnerable than they think they are, especially if Ukraine can get enough volume of these missiles and some of those fancy 100-kilometer range artillery shells that Rheinmetall is putting out. Moving on to the news out of Russia, the Russian Aerospace Forces Long-Range Aviation Command has increased the lethality of its premier air-launched cruise missile by operationally fielding the AS-23 Kodiak, fitted with a second warhead. Now, this takes the existing AS-23 missile and adds a lot more weight to add a second warhead. Thus, they get about half the potential range. But these missiles are already far outranging the distances they'd need to attack Ukraine anyway. So even with the doubled up warheads, it's still just, you're going to be able to hit all the same targets. It just means it'll be even more effective. A detained Ukrainian student at Moscow University is to be expelled from Russia. This says that he was detained 3 different times by Russian authorities and will be thus kicked out of the country. From Bloomberg, Russia uses TikTok content to undermine Ukrainian leadership, according to Ukrainian leaders. Russia is dominating us on TikTok due to the scale of its operation, according to Andrei Kovalenko, a Ukrainian official focused on countering disinformation. In Russia, the largest manufacturer of pasta, Makva, was nationalized. Now, there was some information on this one, and to be honest, it's just like any of the other things. They're nationalizing these companies because they want to be able to give them to their buddies. It's corruption, is what it is. There's otherwise no reason to nationalize them. I believe the company in particular wanted to get out of the market anyway, so these facilities would have been nationalized in the end anyway. The beginning of May in Moscow looks something like this. It's real winter outside today until the evening. The wind is expected to increase with gusts up to 20 meters per second and negative temperatures predicted at night. So they could be looking at some pretty nasty weather for Victory Day. You can see here, this looks like snow falling right here. And the city itself, you can see a longer range view with some more of the snow. Interesting how the weather likes to time its things. Now, Vladimir Putin did give his address on his inauguration and put out a new May decree. The funny thing is that nearly all of the things in the May decree are exactly the same things as the previous May decree, and the previous one before that, and the previous one before that. It's like Vladimir Putin is running against himself, saying that the previous president was so bad he didn't accomplish any of these things, and I'm promising that I'll do them for you. There is a big hangar on fire in a Russian seaport, fire of the area of 5,000 meters squared. They say it's a hangar that caught fire in the sea trading port. Now, it's in the trading port, which means it is not likely a military facility. So not sure why this is on fire, but it could just be coincidence. It could be, military action. That said, I'm not convinced that it is a military action in Petropavlovsk, Kamchatsky. And I just had to share this picture of you of yet another one of the mobile barns that Russia is fielding as anti-drone hardware here. Now, this one's got a large gap on the front, so I think that if you got a large enough warhead and stuck it right through that front there, the Russians might find that they're not having as good a day as they would hope to have with their little barn on top of their tank here. And again, this is as of about an hour ago. There are loud explosions reported in Belgorod, Russia. And there's been fires and explosions reported in the area. So we don't know what they're attacking. This is literally hot off the presses type information. But once again, Belgorod is under attack. Now, the next little bit's going to be mostly information from Anton Herashchenko. He goes through, the poor guy goes through all of this propaganda and translates it for the rest of us and puts subtitles on it and then says what he finds. And this is on part of the area I'm calling Ruski Mir, what the Russians believe the Russian world should be. According to Russian propagandist Solovyev, I've always felt that Finland wanted to go back to the Russian Empire. He says it feels like they are abandoned people, constantly trying to draw attention to themselves somehow. And the dream of the Russian Empire is pounding hard in the heart of the Finnish fishermen. And I don't think that's what's going on over there. I think those Finns have a very negative view of those Russians. There was a winter war that they kind of had over that whole thing. And of course, Solovyev continued to talk here. Russian propagandist Solovyev says it's time all residents of Great Britain learn to breathe underwater. He's threatening to destroy the United Kingdom with Poseidon nuclear weapons. This is what happens, says Anton Herashchenko, when there are no consequences for what they've done to Ukraine. On May 4th in New York, the Russian Youth of America organization held a march known as the Immortal Regiment. But they got under a whole lot of pressure from the Ukrainian community, and they gave up the Soviet and Russian symbols and named the march heroes of World War II, calling themselves apolitical. Interesting what just a little bit of pressure can put onto these people and stop them from marching with Russian flags here in America. Once again, back to Solovyev for just a moment here. He's been issuing threats to, this time, Lithuania and Finland, and he's basically threatened them with weapons of mass destruction. They're going on a tear over there. And I think a lot of this is because they're looking at the potential delivery of F-16s, and they're looking at potential that, like the UK has said, that they can use the British weapons on Russian soil. The Ukrainians can. So they're pretty hot under the collar right now, and they are expressing it by lashing out at everybody and anybody. In Bakhmut, which has been liberated for a year by an army of prisoners led by, basically Wagner at that time. Bakhmut had a sparkling wine factory in the area. It was famous for its wines and has had to put up with the presence of orcs, or Russians in this case. Let me mute the sound here. Who have had to flush the pipes with the locally produced sparkling wine. So whenever they are flushing the pipes and you turn on the tap, you get sparkling wine out, obviously contaminated with whatever contaminants were in the pipes at the time. So with no water facility, they're using whatever they want. And in this case, it's sparkling wine, apparently. Let's move on to the international front for a bit here. President Zelensky did have a phone call with Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban. Said the call was lengthy and focused, and tried to invite them to the peace summit. They're trying to keep good neighborly relations with Hungary. I suspect it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle, especially since Hungary's foreign minister opposed NATO's long-term Ukraine aid plan, calling it a crazy mission. Hungary will stay out of NATO's crazy mission despite all the pressure, he said. European Union ambassadors agreed in principle on a measure for using profits from frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine's recovery and military needs. Now, my understanding is they're going to use 90% of the profits for helping out Ukraine with their either reconstruction or military needs. The United Kingdom got tired of having a military intelligence officer working for Putin in their country. He was apparently Russia's defense attaché who'd been working at the consulate in London. They've expelled Russia's defense attaché and say they will not tolerate Putin's efforts to undermine our nation and democracy, and will continue to stand up for freedom here and in Ukraine. This statement from Lieutenant Admiral Rob Bauer is a little bit concerning. He states it's not too late for Ukraine, Russia's progress limited. Now, the thing is that when you say it's not too late, it indicates that it's really rough for Ukraine. And if they're saying it this way, it means that there's a lot more that needs to be done to keep Ukraine not only in the fight, but kicking Russia out of there. Interesting little side note, Kosovo is not recognized by Ukraine as an independent country. However, Kosovo's government has stated that their support for Ukraine is unconditional. They have been a staunch supporter, at least in words, for Ukraine ever since Russia's initial start of their invasion. Interesting to see. And I wonder if, when all things are said and done, if Kosovo will be recognized by Ukraine in the end. Armenia has basically refused to join up with the Russian-led CSTO security alliance. They won't be financing it. They're not paying anything. Armenia is distancing itself from Russia, and that is a big blow to Russia's ego. Doesn't make any difference from the finances standpoint, but anytime a country says they don't want to be part of the Ruski Mir, the Russians take it personal. India arrested 4 men suspected of luring men to fight for Russia in Ukraine. It includes a translator, visa and transport guy, and 2 recruiters. Now, I did some additional research on this. Apparently, they were promising people in India plum posts at Russian universities for education, and then when they arrived in Russia, they were immediately sent to the front lines as soldiers. So interesting. I'm glad that India is waking up to what's going on in their own backyard. A Russian soldier deserting from the army was arrested in Poland after illegally crossing the Belarusian border, a Polish border guard reported. Now, I don't remember seeing, this might be an update since then. I did not see a reason why he was deserting, but I'm going to see if really quick scan here. Nope, his motivation for desertion is unknown, as well as his intended destination. The Polish deputy interior minister said, "It is possible that we are dealing with a deserter who is fleeing from the coercion of his own country, from the horrors of war, or we are dealing with a person who is supposed to carry out some tasks in the West. The issue of detaining this alleged deserter is extremely important from the point of view of state security." So is he there? Is he really running away? Is he really deserting? Or is he actually on a mission from Putin to cause some havoc in the West? They'll have to figure that out. Lithuania had previously said that they might be interested in sending some of their soldiers on a training mission to Ukraine. However, they're also saying that they would be more than happy to, in fact, this is part of that. They acknowledge that Russia may see it as a provocation, but that if they always considered Russia's views, they wouldn't be able to support Ukraine because of the frequent nuclear threats. So countries are standing up to the Russian bear. Poland finally scrambled fighter jets due to Russian missile strikes on Ukraine. Now, from the map, I didn't see any of the attacks that actually went through Polish airspace this time. So that might be that they scrambled and weren't needed, but, at least they're starting to get serious about responding to these things. Moving over to things going on the front line, and I've cast kind of a broader net today. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has stated that it is too early to see the effects of U.S. aid on Ukraine's front lines. That's very much true from everything I'm researching. Even though some of the initial aid arrived within days of the signature showing up on the documents, that still has to be received in Ukraine, categorized, double-checked, and then issued out to the front lines, where it has to travel through Ukraine in wartime conditions in order to arrive at the front. Now, they have some pretty good logistics over there. They've got an American style of logistics going on from everything I've been able to see. But even so, it takes time, especially in these conditions. The U.S. aid package thus provides a lifeline that can keep the Ukrainians in the fight through the end of 2024, but it's unlikely to help Ukraine avoid an eventual partition, according to Ian Brimmer of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Now, he's got a point there. There needs to be more aid if Ukraine's going to win, or Ukraine's going to have a production capability that not only surpass that of Russia, but can keep them as well protected as well, so that Russia can't just bomb it back into the Stone Age again. This video is kind of interesting. Let me pop it up here. No, that's picture in picture. I want full screen here. I got to mute that music. Boop. If you watch carefully, you'll see over here on the right, there is a Bradley fighting vehicle right here at this end of this road. And down over here is a T-80 tank. And if you watch carefully, let's back it up one more time. You'll see the missile launch from the Bradley here. Streaks across the screen and impacts the T-80 at the far end, entirely destroying it. And this is a strike of 0.96 miles, or about 1.6 kilometers. Quite the impressive strike with a tow missile at a target that was probably right there at the very end of that road. Yes, it's a long straight road, but they'd have a lot of time to see this Bradley and potentially react before the Bradley could get that missile all the way across there. This crew knew what they were doing, in my opinion. Now let's take a pop over to the deep state map. They've got a few updates. Now understand they're typically about 24 to 48 hours out of time. So here's the latest here. The Russians have advanced at Netilova and south of Pervomaisk. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Back up a step. And we can see some general move forward along in here and along in here. This is all kind of southwest of Avdiivka, meaning the Russians are still trying to get a little bit more going on before heavy-duty aid shows up at the front lines. NOLA reports actually stated there were no confirmed map changes today, and I think that's probably accurate. Like I said, Deep State tends to be about 24 to 48 hours behind. This is all confirmed from War Gonzo, Russian source here, stating that on the Zaporizhia front, no changes to the front lines significant. Donetsk front, no changes to the front lines. Chasiv Yar, fighting continues without any significant changes. So overall, we're looking at relatively static lines for today. Tomorrow will be another day. There is a report that came in about midday today, though, that a Russian assault group broke into Krasnohorivka itself, but were blocked from further progress at a local plant. This is not a good news for Ukraine, but the fact that they've managed to stop them for now at least means that there will be a chance for them to kick them back out. We'll be monitoring. The town of Chasiv Yar is almost destroyed. You can see the buildings there's still a lot of standing buildings, but you can see they've all been damaged or otherwise put in a condition where they will not be able to be used, except for maybe snipers with their rifles and things like that. Russia is reportedly forming a group of forces north of the city of Kharkiv, intending to attempt an attack on the city. Again, we are still watching the situation. There's been rumors here, rumors in Sumy, and this is the first sign we're seeing of actual forces potentially grouping up in preparation for an assault. The interesting part is going to be, will Ukraine see them building up and drop a few missiles on their heads? Something to watch for. This video shows kind of what Chasiv Yar looks like now. These large apartment buildings, I assume these are residential buildings primarily. They look like Soviet style apartment blocks. You can see the windows blown out, the damage to the roofs, no roof to speak of. Most of the buildings are heavily damaged. And the overall situation is going to be pretty rough. Now, there's about 690 some people that still live in Chasiv Yar who've refused to evacuate. Hardy people, and more power to them. I just hope that they get out if it's necessary before they're hemmed in. With any luck and with the arrival of assistance, they may not even have to pull out at all. And if they do, then they'll have managed to survive for another day. The situation in Robotyne is interesting. The Russians have claimed to have captured more than half of the settlement in Robotyne. However, the Ukrainians filmed a video. Again, I got to mute it. Actually, I can't play this video because there are too many corpses in it. Where they are showing the area near the secondary school in Robotyne on the southern part of the settlement, which means that Ukrainians still have control of the bulk of, if not all, of the settlement of Robotyne. That means that the Russians are marching in. They're getting wiped out each time they do so. That does not make it an easy situation. It just means that's how it is at the moment. A Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 showing off its low-level combat air patrol mission over the western part of the country with a rare loadout of 6 R-73 all-aspect air homing air-to-air missiles. This could be the loadout they're using to hunt down drones and other large drone-type targets to keep them from attacking their cities. One more method for dealing with these drones that are being sent constantly into Ukraine. And from the Ukraine control map, a breakdown of Russian armored fighting vehicle losses since the start of the year. Since January, 449 tanks have been destroyed or damaged for an average of 3.5 per day. They've also lost 567 BMPs for an average of 4.4 per day. 170 MTLBs and 151 BTR 80s or 82s were also lost. For comparison, and this is where it gets interesting, Russia at this time period last year had lost only 285 tanks, a little bit more than half, and 299 BMPs, or about half, as well as 67 MTLBs and 67 BTR 80 or 82s. Russian losses are escalating in this war. A lot. And that's the situation on the front lines. I've got a couple of extra items here before we close out the part that talks about Ukraine. So absolutely, we'll get through this in a minute here. I'll let you know right before we switch over to the other stuff. There's also a cute cat video. That's cute. Well, okay, it's not so cute, but it is a cat video. I'll talk about it at the time. I've been sitting on this post for probably 3 months. Had it sitting in my phone, just waiting to have the right time to talk about it. And it never seemed like the right time came up. But today's the day. Howard Buffett, the son of billionaire Warren Buffett, gave Ukraine $150 million of his personal money in 2022. In 2023, he bought a total of $360 million for Ukraine. At his own expense, he built kitchen factories in Bucha and Lozovaya, police stations in Boryanka and Izium, and a dog training center in Bucha. Buffett brings combine harvesters, tractors, and seeds to Ukraine and gives them to farmers for free. He buys and brings mine clearance vehicles to Ukraine. In some areas, mine clearance is the main type of agricultural work. Buffett supports the Ukrainian police, bought dozens of DNA detection machines, bought service dogs of the highest level of training in the Netherlands and brought them to Ukraine. Buffett helped search for war criminals, created a separate organization in Ukraine to do so. He financed the creation and operation of the Superhuman Center, an open prosthetic center near Lviv. He bought and brought 2,400 high-power generators. In September 2023, Buffett and Ukrealizentsia created the world's first kitchen train that can operate offline for 5 to 7 days during blackouts and produce 70,000 servings of food during the week. How much money does Howard Buffett have? It's hard to say because he spends them all the time. He has already spent $500 million on Ukraine. He fell in love with Ukraine, visited 10 times during the war, and it feels like he spends more time in Ukraine than at home in the United States. The rest of this is biographical information, but this is a man who earned a fortune. He could be living in a perfect life of luxury, entirely ignoring the needs of others. But he's spending his time in Ukraine helping people, helping soldiers get prosthetics to replace their lost limbs, helping people to eat, helping farmers to farm, helping the sappers to remove mines and demine fields and equipment. This is what charity looks like. This is a man who knows what he's doing. He has principles, and he's putting his own principles on the line in Ukraine. You don't often see that type of good news about very, very, very rich people. And this appears to be unabashedly positive. And gives me a little bit of hope. Often in this day and age, we look at all that is going on, and we say there's no hope in the world, that mankind is lost. And then we have men like this, who bring hope to the hopeless, who bring food to the starving, who bring he takes care of those in need. And what a world it would be if more men would do so. I happened to bump into this. I've seen this in no news organizations. I've seen this in no papers, no articles, no magazines. He does not go to Ukraine to advertise. He gives his alms in secret so that Father in heaven, his God, can reward him openly. And he's not asking for a reward. He's doing the right thing. And it helps so much to see somebody doing the right thing. Sorry, let me wipe my eyes a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and drop this link into the chat. So if you guys want to look at that and get those details for yourselves, absolutely, please do so. Russia has announced nuclear weapons drills, and as Ivana Strodner says, with nuclear threats, Putin plays the West like a fiddle. There's a whole lot of psychological games going on when they do so. However, according to Igor Sushko, not all may be right in this particular drill. Number one, the Federal Protective Service has got some special measures planned for the Defense Ministry HQ. Now, this could be a lockdown for the anticipated removal of senior members of staff there. But since tomorrow is, well, at this point, today is May 9th for Russia, the odds are they will wait until after the parades to do so. This would be a big black eye if all of a sudden all the senior military leadership ended up in chains right before their parade. I had more on this, and where was it? Oh, yes. I'm going to have to go off memory because I've apparently misplaced the link here. Anyway, yes, that's what it was. The nuclear weapons drills, these nuclear threats and the weapons drills could be the catalyst here, because it's reported that it is likely that these drills will fail. And if they fail, it will be due to corruption by these top officials here. So this could be a test, not for the West, but for Shoigu, Gerasimov, and the Ministry of Defense. Interesting to speculate. Astronaut 24 military exercises of Poland, the United States, and the Baltic states have started with the goal of expanding the integration of integrated air and missile defense systems, building airspace command and control architecture, integration of multinational IMD forces and assets, and practicing a field training exercise and live virtual constructive scenarios. This is about combining real exercises with real-time virtual visualization. So note the location. The Baltics. This is an area where Russia has been getting very vocal about lately. This type of exercise is going to be a vital component if the Russians try something in the Baltics. There's a message being sent here. I'm going to quickly share this video.
Закрити пальці.
Oh, geez, too loud.
Розкрити пальці. Розкрити середні пальці.
These are soldiers. In fact, let me just mute this outright. These are Ukrainian soldiers who lost their arms in the war, and they're learning to use bionic prosthetics. As you can see, he's wired up to electrodes. He's got the post already prepared for for mounting the arm. These soldiers are having to learn how to do basic tasks with their new prosthetic limb. Think about how much this technology has advanced over the last 20 years. 30 years ago, if you had a wooden arm, you wouldn't be there wouldn't be able to do anything with it. Now we've got somebody who might be able to do something as simple as pick up a cup of water, bring it to their lips with their prosthetic arm. While I doubt they'll be writing their name or signing their checks with it, this gives them a tremendous amount of options that they could never have without even just this prosthetic arm. This one I'm sharing, this is from 2023. This is a Ukrainian girl filming herself with her cat during a missile strike in Kryvyi Rih. This attack killed at least 10 civilians at the time. Now, I have cats myself. I'm sure I've expressed that before. The girl needs the cat. The cat needs the girl. You can see the panic in their eyes. Might not be the funnest cat video out there, but remember what I've said many times, how you treat your pets, your animals, the lesser animals, says so much about your character. And yet sometimes it's how your animals treat you that shows true love. These two are comforting each other in a very troubling moment in time. And that's everything about Ukraine. I'm going to go on to some other news items that are not related to Ukraine at all. I'm going to talk about presidential politics for a little bit. I'm going to talk about a few other things. I'm not taking a partisan position on any of this right now, but some people will probably accuse me of doing so in the end. That said, I just want to provide some information that I've bumped into over the last couple of days that I thought was very much important for people, especially in the United States, though certainly others might see many of the same things. I'm going to be talking briefly about the Israel conflict that was started by Hamas, very briefly, because there's some real changes going on there. I'm going to talk about Donald Trump. I'm going to talk about RFK Jr. So let's go ahead and jump into that right now. Well, before I do that, I just want to say, if you are done with your Ukraine news and don't want to see the rest of this, now's the time to log on off. I do appreciate you being here. Give me that old thumbs up if you enjoyed the Ukraine news portion. I'm doing these extended news items mainly because I've got restricted time availability right now, and I want to get this information out there and don't have the time to record and edit a video. I am working on a video on RFK Jr. I've already done videos on Donald Trump and various other presidential candidates in the past. I'm going to need to do one on Joe Biden at sometime in the near future as well. But right now, we got things to talk about. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the other news. E. Rosalie says, no one is talking about all the platforms banned in China. The U.S. could say, you want your platform, like TikTok, here, then your citizens should have access to ones based in the United States as well. Shift the conversations. Don't get led around by an autocracy pretending to care about free speech. And you might say, well, so what? They banned something that's from us. Well, here's some of them, just a short list. The BBC, Instagram, Gmail, Spotify, Wikipedia, WhatsApp, YouTube, Snapchat, Quora, and Slack. Strangely, many places are actually sources of information that do not toe the Chinese party line. Hence why they're banned in China. From Robert J. Salvador, he's talking about these announcements. For those who are not in the know, Ron DeSantis has been on quite the amazing tear down there in Florida, announcing conservative win after conservative win. I myself am conservative. I see many of these things he's doing, and I absolutely say, wow, that is serious conservative priorities there. This is a minute and a half long here. Let me just go ahead and play it.
We've also seen it in actions we've already taken in the state of Florida. For example, we are the first state to ban the Chinese Communist Party from buying land in our state. And why would we want them to have land here? And other states have now followed suit because you've seen a movement. They want farmland. They want land near military bases. And they're not just doing that to contribute to America. They're doing it for their own interests. So you see that. We also were the first state to enact policies to prevent the imposition of a central bank digital currency. And that's something that the Fed has talked about. They don't have authority to do it absent Congress, but they may do it at some point anyways, or try to. And that'll be a way to phase out cash, have a digital dollar, which they are going to have supervision over. And they'll have supervision over how you use that. And that's totally comes out of this playbook. Where you have these elites that want to impose that down, and they've bragged about it. You could look at things like Davos and the World Economic Forum. They'll have panels where people will be bragging. They'll say, yeah, if you have central bank digital currency, you can circumscribe ammunition purchases, fuel, all the things that they don't want you to do. So it's clearly, it's not a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's just a wolf coming as a wolf, and we said no to that, and that was smart.
All right, so that is what Ron DeSantis is getting in the middle of over there, and it's some great conservative potential that he's talking about there, and he's just getting the job done without a huge amount of fanfare. He's just doing the things that need to be done, which is what most of these politicians should be doing anyway, marking up the wins without causing a lot of waves. So I'm pretty impressed with Ron DeSantis these days, and I wish him well in his future endeavors here. It's just interesting to see that even after he has dropped out of the presidential election, there are still people attacking him constantly, calling him everything but a fake conservative, to a rhino, to everything under the sun, including some people claiming that he's involved with strippers and all this type of stuff. I mean, it's just stupid character assassination stuff. I miss the days when people would just mark their wins and not cause waves. This is the map I mentioned yesterday, the one that talks about Myanmar, with the resistance controlling more than half of Myanmar's territory. Now, I believe the population footprint would show that the regime, the military junta, controls more people, but half of the country is now in rebellion hands. This is long. Now, this is about Georgia and the fact that there's a bunch of protests going on over there, talking about why it mattered and why this bill that's supposedly about the transparency of foreign influence is really more about revealing and shaming, naming and shaming those who have a pro-Western influence in their lives there. And rather than go through this whole thing, I'm just going to link it. This thread is excellent. It's quite well written, and I do encourage you to read it when you have time. I'd say it's about a 5-minute read. It's long for Twitter. It is not long if you actually sit down and read it. There's pictures. But so many things interact in this world. The situation in Georgia is one of them. And I think that we ought to be paying attention to it. Now let's go ahead and move on to Israel. This is as of 3 days ago now. There was a major attack from Rafah, near the Rafah crossing, with a mortar attack on Israeli positions. The thing is that the Rafah crossing is where all the aid is going into Gaza. That crossing was immediately closed and the IDF marched in. Hamas triggered this. Now, of course, there's always going to be somebody saying, oh, that was clearly an IDF-made provocation. Yeah, prove it. That's all I have to say to you. Prove it. But the U.S. is not particularly happy with Israel marching into Rafah. Now, the Israelis now have the Rafah crossing point in their control. But the U.S. has now suspended delivery of thousands of bombs to Israel over fears that they could be dropped on Rafah. And the thing is that if the bombs are not being delivered to Israel, it means that Israel will have to use less accurate, unguided munitions. And therefore, it's going to cause more civilian deaths as Israel moves through Rafah and tries to take out the rest of Hamas. Biden says the U.S. will halt arms shipments to Israel if it pursues a Rafah invasion. Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. I made it clear into Rafah, if they go into Rafah, which at that point they hadn't gone into Rafah yet, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been historically used to deal with Rafah. Of course, there is one minor detail. In fact, I'm pretty sure that during the Trump administration that the withholding of congressionally passed aid from Ukraine resulted in an impeachable offense. As John David Soriano states, I've been reliably informed that withholding congressionally approved aid for an ally for political reasons is an impeachable offense. It seems like you've been had, Speaker Mike Johnson. Time to rectify the situation by introducing articles of impeachment. Let no one say that there isn't plenty of hypocrisy to go around in our U.S. halls of Congress and our executive offices. Now, there has been a call for basically they have a motion to vacate for Speaker Johnson that was finally called today. Marjorie Taylor Greene brought it to the floor, and the motion to table it passed. And for those that don't understand this, because it took me a bit to wrap my head around it, a motion to table this resolution, this motion, means that it is moved from active consideration on the floor and is basically discarded. Anything that has been tabled is basically dead in the water. So Marjorie Taylor Greene moved to vacate. The motion came to, they made a motion to table it instead. And take a look at these numbers and see if I've got a better picture of this. Nope, I think they're both the same. Let's see what that looks like. Good. Okay. On the motion to table, which is to get rid of this motion to vacate, Republicans 196 said yay, 11 said nay. Democrats 163 said yay, 32 said nay, 7 were just voting present, for a total of 359 yays and 43 nays. Now, look at some of these things for a moment here. This was strongly bipartisan. This was not even close. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, the whole crew had been yelling, Thomas Massie had been yelling about this motion to vacate, how they were going to absolutely kick the speaker out, that there would be a majority of Republicans that would absolutely support it. It appears that their aggressive posturing has finally backfired because 359 in a bipartisan manner with more Republicans by far all tabled the motion and are keeping Speaker Mike Johnson. That does not mean, I might add, that Speaker Mike Johnson is doing everything right or making me happy. But all of these motions to vacate have done one thing, and that is weaken the Republican ability to get anything done. And thus they have burned their political capital in these ridiculous motions to vacate, in the ridiculous speaker fights that required 15 rounds of voting, the ridiculous promises and giving in to a radical tiny wing that has resulted in the absolute crushing of the Republican majority. So keep that in mind, Marjorie Taylor Greene. As Tyndar states, Marjorie Taylor Greene's attempt to oust Speaker Mike Johnson ended in a resounding defeat for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Only 43, most of them Democrats, supported the motion. The overwhelming majority from both sides of the aisle seemed to be tired of that oxygen-stealing drama. And it's an unusual situation to see when things no longer go on partisan lines to such a tremendous extent. We could be witnessing the very first signs of the weakening of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Possibly. It is still a very loud part of the Republican Party. The question is it a majority of the Republican Party at this point in time? I don't know. I'm not convinced. So let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, this is his come from behind independent presidential bid has been getting a lot of bullying influence just lately. Now, I have been researching RFK Jr. I'm working on a video on him. I actually sent a series of questions to his campaign, hoping that they would take the time to respond to them. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that they'll provide a spokesperson that I can interview over like a Zoom call or something like that, and then get some answers as to what RFK Jr. brings to the table for conservatives. Odds of getting a response for somebody of my size channel, not good, but it never hurts to ask. So he's already on the ballot in 10 states. He managed to pick up, I believe, 4 more in just a recent couple of days, making it 14 states. He's managed to work with a couple of parties, for instance, the American Independent Party or Independent American Party, American Independent Party, whatever it is. It's the party over in California. I think it's American Independent Party. He's apparently worked with them to get ballot access in California. He's worked with another party to do so. He's now talking with the Reform and Alliance parties to potentially use them for ballot access, not necessarily as their nominee, but at least to a certain extent that there'd be a coordination that would allow him to use their party's access to ballots in some states to be able to get on the ballot in more states. And if things continue as they are going, then we could see RFK Jr. effectively running a campaign in all 50 states and carrying quite a percentage. Polls have been showing up to 20% support for him in any three-way matchup, and the support that he polls is right now mostly from Donald Trump. Now, one of the attack lines that's been coming out was a video that talked about about 6-8 months ago, where he was asked almost out of the blue about puberty blockers and transgenderism. He, at the time, kind of gave an answer of along the lines of, well, I haven't really researched it. My first thought is to not get the government involved in the parent the parent and child relationship, and therefore whatever would work that way. He has done more research and he's released this statement. The more I learn, the more troubled I have become about giving puberty blockers to youth. Minors cannot drive, vote, join the army, get a tattoo, smoke, or drink because we know that children do not fully understand the consequences of decisions with lifelong ramifications. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for skills like planning, prioritizing, and making good decisions, doesn't fully mature until the early to mid-20s. I don't think children can genuinely consent to repurposed castration drugs or puberty blockers and surgical mutilation, which have permanent, irreversible effects. People with gender dysphoria or who want to change their gender deserve compassion and respect, but these terribly consequential procedures should be deferred till adulthood. We must protect our children. A Newsweek poll states that 54% of Americans believe RFK Jr. should be allowed on the ballot in all 50 states, with only 13% disagreeing. Interesting, he's building a real bit of momentum here. Of course, that's going to get your detractors. There was a story that recently got surfaced in Bad Cuts talking about him having a dead worm in his brain. And so, of course, Representative Mike Collins from Georgia 10 said, you either die a Kennedy with a hole in the brain or live long enough to become a Kennedy with a hole in the brain. This is the type of disgusting personal attacks that just absolutely gets under my skin. It would have taken literally zero effort to just not say this. And yet he said it anyway, showing a tremendous lack of judgment as to what is appropriate to say After all, 2 Kennedys were assassinated. The holes in their brain. The fact that RFK Jr. has managed to survive, even with the supposed brainworm, is amazing. But I am not one to entirely go without an explanation or anything like that. We just jump ahead a little bit. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. addressed the brainworm hit piece from the New York Times. The doctors misdiagnosed him with a brain tumor, which turned out to be a common parasite, brainworm, he contracted from eating undercooked pork while doing environmental work in India. He got a parasite while doing environmental work. Come on, people, be better. Show a little bit of class. As this is an RFK Jr. supporter, obviously, hate breeds hate. We are at an all-time low, surrounded by subhumans that cheer on this disgusting, vile, most irresponsible behavior from people elected to lead us to better times. Or as Scott L. Bird states, this is the exact type of venom that will get RFK Jr. elected in a landslide. Both parties are losing their minds. Sanity and dignity must prevail. And in the end, whether RFK Jr. is elected or not, or even stands a chance, that does not give you the excuse to attack him on personal, disgusting grounds. Now I'm going to link right here, and I'm going to state for the record, I have watched this video. I found it very interesting. I have not made a conclusion as to what I'm going to do in the presidential elections at this point. However, the first 5 minutes or so are Robert F. Kennedy reading basically attack pieces on him, what people have said negative about him. Then in about 5 to 7 minutes in, it goes into more of who he is and then into what he believes. So if you want to, the link is in the comments here. If you're going to make a decision on the presidential election, you ought to come with the best available facts. And the ones who are talking about holes in heads are not the ones providing the best possible facts. But I am not, shall we say, without interest in the other candidates in the race. I'm going to start off with an interesting video that Dick Van Dyke, of all people, I'm surprised he's still alive, put out talking about about Trump's evident trajectory to the White House for consideration.
I'm Dick Van Dyke. You may remember me. I used to fall down a lot on purpose. I don't speak up a lot, but there's something on my mind that I wanted to talk about. You know, our Supreme Court has delayed any decision about a president's immunity, and at the same time they have stalled everything so that Donald Trump's path back to the White House is pretty clear now. And when that happened, both of the cable network stations printed headlines, "Corrupt. Our Supreme Court is corrupt." And then nothing. Silence. Not another word been spoken about it by anybody. They dropped the subject as if they'd been squelched. At the same time, for some reason, our college students, out of the blue, became very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. I'm beginning to feel a little manipulated somehow. Think about it, will you? Thanks.
Now, Dick Van Dyke is a quality individual, and he makes a good point here. He doesn't give a partisan position on it, although I think it's pretty clear he has a partisan position. He's just asking you to think about it. So interesting to talk about, and I'm going to talk about a few of Trump's legal woes here. And to be honest, most of it is positive for Trump. So bear with me as I go through a few things here. The Brooklyn State Senator Kevin Parker, who supported and voted for the Adult Survivors Act, enabling E. Jean Carroll to sue Trump over accusations of assault from 3 decades ago, now asserts that the law is unconstitutional. It turns out that somebody's accusing him using the exact same law. So it's funny how unconstitutional it gets when it's being used against you. Today we learned, this was as of May 6th, so it's been 2 days now. Today we learned not only did Trump Organization pay back Michael Cohen for the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels, we also saw with handwritten notes that the Trump Organization doubled the payment on the books so they could get a bigger tax break. So basically, he made Uncle Sam pay for Stormy Daniels' silence. This is the type of corruption that we see in government, and we see it in the Trump Organization throughout. Anybody who thinks that Trump is going to get rid of corruption, he has been corruption from the bottom to the top. So understand, Donald Trump is not going to end the swamp. We'll discuss that in a little bit too. Lucille says, we know Dick Van Dyke used to shoot skeet with him. He was such a down-to-earth guy that I didn't even realize he was the famous actor for a very long time, even though I knew his name. And that's the kind of guy that Dick Van Dyke just is. Just a natural human being. He's only bigger than life on the stage. So let's talk about some of Trump's other legal woes. And to be honest, these are all positive-ish for Donald Trump. Per Judge Cannon's authorization, Trump just filed unsealed version of motion to dismiss on selective or vindictive prosecution. This motion to dismiss mentions that Biden had secret documents, confidential documents. Pence had confidential documents. Obama had confidential documents. Biden had confidential documents. A whole lot of people had confidential documents, and yet the only one getting legal action against him is Donald Trump. I don't think that this motion to dismiss will pass, but it is an indictment of our justice system that all these other people are not. Now, there are going to be some people that said, well, the other people, when they found it, they turned it back in. And if you believe that, I might have a bridge over in Brooklyn to sell you, because these people had held onto those documents for a very long time. Most of them probably knew they had them. This was I just happened to find this stuff here. So watch that. I might give you Pence. He might have ended up with something on accident. But Biden, he had boxes of the stuff. He used them for his ghostwriter. Obama had a warehouse full of stuff. So there you go. Now, you see the usual suspects once again claim Judge Eileen Cannon is delaying the classified documents trial by putting on hold a key hearing that requires the defense to disclose what classified records they intend to use at trial. But she points out that that Smith had delayed in producing all the discovery until the end of March, and that there were still due process rights. There are overlaps to other cases. They're trying to railroad Donald Trump. And the thing is, I think Donald Trump is already guilty of plenty of things. If they'd have done it right the first time, there wouldn't even be this question. But there's more to this than meets the eye. Let me see. Do I have it here? Dang it. There we go. Here it is. At the same time, these frauds will refuse to cover all of the new developments related to DOJ tampering with evidence, misrepresenting the condition of the evidence to the court, doctored evidence, and perhaps even missing or misplaced documents. Now, I mentioned in a previous video about about a bunch of these boxes full of stuff, pallets of documents that were held by by NARA, and then they forced Donald Trump to pick them up and take them. Well, if you remember back when when all this stuff went down, there was this absolutely famous picture showing a spread of classified documents just laid out with these brightly colored confidential forms on the top of them, and it was reported to the judge that this is exactly how they found these classified documents in this situation spread out in an open situation like this. When you read through the filings, however, you start getting a different picture. Jack Smith had to admit that no, they did not find these documents just spread out in the open for anybody to read. The brightly colored classification papers, those were printed and made by the FBI. And then they went through and pulled documents out of boxes and put them there with these covers on them with these classification documents. So they pulled them out of boxes and laid them out into this orgy of evidence type situation. That would be proof that Donald Trump was doing this evil stuff with classified documents. Then there was the reported that all of the documents have been kept in the exact same order they were found in, and yet the actual filings, when you go through them, indicate that no, they were not. They represented that to the judge as though these documents, this is exactly how these documents were found in the boxes, that we marked where they were in these boxes, and that this is exactly how they were laid out. And it turns out that's not accurate either. They screwed it up. They messed with the evidence. There are so many things that this prosecution has done wrong in this classified documents case that what should have been a slam dunk legal case, because we already know Donald Trump mishandled classified documents. For heaven's sakes, he gave classified documents while he was to the Russians when he was sitting in the White House. This should be a slam dunk prosecution. And they screwed it up. Now the question is going to be, did they plant the evidence? Because now their credibility before the judge has been destroyed. So there's going to be a whole lot of commentary about this in the next few days if you pay attention to it. But of course, Donald Trump, he's a forgiving man, apparently. He's been tweeting about how he thinks the new FBI building should be built in Washington, D.C. and should be a big, beautiful centerpiece of Donald Trump's plan to totally renovate and rebuild our capital city. This is literally the people that are screwing up the classified documents case, that are doing these raids. Why is he doing this? I don't know. Maybe he hopes that the FBI will love him because he gives them a big, beautiful new federal office building. I don't know. But in the end, this is the latest on what's going on with Donald Trump. I do realize that this is not related to the Ukraine war. It's different material, and I wanted to address a lot of these things. I just don't have the time to do it in another video right now. So I do appreciate you guys sticking with me. I do appreciate everything that you guys comment. Thank you. Thank you again. And I want you to know how much I appreciate it. That's everything for today. So if you have any questions, absolutely leave them in the comments below. I'll be paying attention for them, and I'll also be watching to make sure YouTube doesn't turn the comments off again. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.